People talk about the aspect of displacement, for example. Displacement in development. Pamba papo, for one papane, I know, Akomana, you went to go this Sapchoro West, which has better.
So, unfortunately, you have to do that in
yeah. He was my student. I'll be breaking the English, of course. I'm not good at it. He was my student at university at some point. He will help us in explaining Pareto efficiency, optimal efficiency. Why? Because we need to strike a balance between the advantages that we extract from the local resources and also strengthening local communities. I have an interesting case of Chilonga, which is Mike talking about. I would think that the issue of lucerne grass production, for example, is a lucrative venture, but perhaps we may need to look at the model to then say, no, you as Dente, you may not have to come here and be the one producing it, but do it through small order production by local communities. So I think in all our conversations, communities, they are the strategic spaces for the climate change conversations. We need to strengthen. Let's go there. Let's see their problems and talk about them more. I was recently engaged in a program on the differential impacts of climate change on rural women. I was focusing on Butu district. I shared them with the Zim Court in a last meeting. I will share with you colleagues. But there are quite exciting issues emanating from communities to the extent that somebody said that they are so rich in local knowledge, which local knowledge should be integrated with the scientific models so that we generate a hybrid that can address our situation.
I think it's that's quite interesting, especially even in the last part where like which science counts, right? I think there are a lot of even within the discourse of the documentation that is happening at the IPCC level, the highest body that is documenting, the impacts and of climate change, and especially from the scientific perspective. I think the community perspectives, indigenous knowledge systems, I think is coming up, very well, and also being accepted in the literature just to show the evidence. So thank you very much, and I would like to open this for if anybody has questions to the communities, questions to Sydney, just responding to his. So I'll just allow you to be very, very brief. Don't explain your question, but just ask the question, right? So thank you very much, and I would like to, by a show of hands, so that at least I can be systematic, and then we need to close this session. Thank you. Anybody who wants to respond to Sydney, to the communities?
Questions online.
Okay. So whilst we're waiting, so I know the people in the room are warming up, but we have some questions here. Maybe you can just note these. So Sydney, what you need to do, or any colleagues from the who presented on community perspectives, just take note, and then you just respond in a very short time. Do we have a clear climate justice agenda as Global South, and what is the standpoint of our leaders when it comes to climate justice issues? Right. So I'm assuming that since this is happening back to back with the SADC summit, the leaders that are being referred to are our presidents, right? So do we have a clear climate justice agenda? And I'm happy that this question is not just for Zimbabwe, it's just for everybody. So Sydney, you are also, you can say something, but I think all of us can also contribute to this question. So, and then there's also another question, kindly clarify on what really are carbon credits. I think Sydney spoke to this, and how do we as Zimbabwe stand to benefit if there's any benefit, right? So I think he's saying Zimbabwe, I think it also applies to the region. Then there's also another question. I have a challenge with being international, right? Being international about climate change issues as a nation. I don't know which nation this is. At times, those entrusted with spearheading the agenda or campaign are found to be culprits. For instance, a generator for EMA This is environmental management, I suppose, right? Is found to be releasing much smoke and making much noise due to lack of service. There is need to balance our words with actions. I think this is very good observation, right? Because we also need to walk the talk. In other, right? So this is from the virtual participants. Anybody? I saw SADC. Yeah. If somebody can share the mic. So I'm going to take maximum maybe 3 people and then we move on, right? Yeah. I'll start with SADC and then Madam, then who else?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. What I would encourage us to do also, if we have questions, we can write them down and we can pass them on to our hosts. Okay, all right. So you can start since you have the mic already.
Thank you very much. I won't take most of your time. Firstly, I think as I was listening to the presentations, I feel that we must understand the global centers of power, which affects us within where we are. As long as we don't have that, we travel a lot of global ourselves. You find we discuss and do, but not knowing what hits us up there. You think you are the one here. Secondly, I think very much my friend, my lecturer, when I was not a lecturer, a presentation to the bishops in Kwelo. Thank you very much. We work as churches with the community. So I think the main thing we can spend hours here is the local mobilization ourselves as a region or as Zimbabweans. That's very critical. I'll be very much happy when this thing comes at the end to say we don't care, but we are starting our own mobilizations also as a region. Also, I say, just imagine when the budget of the country is coming from the Minister of Finance, there's money to it, which comes. That money is used to civil society and around climate change. Let's lobby for that so that we have that clear. Also, let's shun the government when it's talking about climate change. We are going up there to the centers of power, which we are trapped by that money, and we are heavy debt, which will never come out.
You can conclude.
Yeah, don't accept the funds with conditions, which at the end will give into problems.
Thank you. Yeah, so SADC and then Madam, then we close the session and then we just get a reaction and we move on.
Thank you very much, Sydney, for the presentation. Well, I understood it. That was being referred to by Dr. Chakunda. So my question to the presentation, though it was a very concise and straightforward presentation, I would want to understand what are the dimensions of or the climate, peace and security dimensions which the government or the local authorities should enhance or adopt in order to address issues to do with or issues which are emanating from the displacements which are continuously ravaging our countries, not only in Zimbabwe but in Southern Africa. So I would want to understand that from a climate security framework perspective, what should we do as local communities, as local authorities? Because I want to expand from what was being alluded to by Doc in terms of the issue of Pareto efficiency or Pareto optimality. Or, of course, I'm not an expert in terms of economics, but I understand that the Pareto talks about development and the scenarios and trade-offs which happens between conservatives and issues to do with displacement, like what you are alluding to. So I would want to understand, what should we do? Should we leave issues like, for example, in Chilonga, where the government was stressing about lucerne production and fodder production as a developmental thing which might benefit the country at large, and the people were reluctant and they were complaining that we are being deprived of our, or removed from our heritage. So what should we do? Should we not develop at the expense of the environment? And if the benefits from the displacements, like what we saw in Chiago, offset the issues to do with culture and heritage. So I want to understand from you, from a climate, peace and security perspective, what should be done? Because as far as I'm concerned, Zimbabwe or any developmental aspirations of the country should not be hindered just because we are talking about heritage.
Sorry, Sidik. I think you are almost giving him the answer. So let's end with the question. Thank you. Yeah. So we just want to get the perspectives. I appreciate where you are coming from. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I don't have a question as such. I was touched by other lady who talked about they go for distance fishing firewood. These days there is no need to go and fish firewood. You can start introducing Zozo stove.
Okay, that's a solution there. That's a solution there. That no need. But of course we can talk about it. Thank you. So I'd like to give back to sorry, we are here. Just in brief, right?
Yeah. It's very difficult when experts ask questions. Ndakafunda kumanika land and kwamutambara uko taiti zvibvunzo nhando. But I'm glad that we are here to push through. So I'll start by the question around peace and security and displacement. And I'll give a good example, one of the Zambezi Valley in Zambia, then the framework of Zimbabwe around what we call displacement. If you go to those two countries, the governments of Zimbabwe and Zambia, they don't call them displacements, they call them resettlements. This is the first point of debate. Once you have got different definitions of a particular activity, it means that the solution to it is totally different. Because a resettlement would speak to the need and nexus to development. Displacement is more to humanitarian and refugee status. So you find that the peace and security elements that would come through resistance of local communities because they are being removed from their indigenous land, it's part of the resistance that would emanate if people are being forcibly displaced for purposes of development. But also as a community, from a climate change perspective, I'll give you an example of what happened Tokwem Nkosi, right? When Tokwem Nkosi was constructed in 2014, they estimated that they would just need to resettle about 6,000 people. But when Tokwem Nkosi Dam overflowed, right, 20,000 people were then displaced, right? Because the government was not prepared for such a huge number. But what they did was that these people were taken into a transition camp at Chingwizi. But then beyond that, most of the people were taken to Naunet game range. What happens is that these people were going to a virgin land where they needed to start construction, they needed to do plantations and things like that, which means that they would disturb the new ecosystem, right? So from a climate perspective, it means that each time that people are being moved to new virgin lands, they are going to obstruct the biodiversity in that community and the ecosystem. So there is also a challenge that comes in within those areas, even when mines expand. But like you said, can we stop development for the purposes of climate change? What then needs to happen is that once there is a developmental project, there has to be a plan to which then you need to fit in the climate impact of what is happening. The generator question that came out there was that EMA is the one that is actually polluting more than people who are localized, but yet EMA is dealing with issues of environment. It also goes even when you look at the type of cars that we have here in Zimbabwe, but maybe mainly in Southern Africa, that we're importing from Japan. Most of them, they would emit so much carbon monoxide into the atmosphere. But even if the government would say no more importation of cars that are more than 10 years old, it also means that they're also trying to deal with that. But half of those cars, if you look at the ownership, I don't want to say, but you would also see that the ownership of most of those cars are the very same people who are supposed to be protecting the law. You know, so it also goes to the point of saying, does the right hand know what the left hand is doing? And who is actually controlling those mechanisms? Then the other thing as well, which Reverend talked about, was that do we even know the centers of power when we're having all this conversation? And who should we target? So even at a national level, do we even know the centers of power who determine what is happening at a local level? When Professor Mtuli comes up with his budget, who is he informing and what is informing his budget? But how many of us have gone into budget consultation to push for a green climate budget for Zimbabwe? How many of you have actually gone there to push a green climate agenda for SADC, to say the finances that are coming in with SADC are supposed to ensure that we have got green economies? And where is that money coming from our local endowments, without necessarily exploiting the natural resources that we have? Because at the present moment, you actually realize that most of the budgets that we have are not green at all. What they have done is that if the Minister of Education is dealing with something with climate change, if Minister of Women's Affairs is dealing with climate change, if Minister of Environment is dealing with climate change, what they do is that they will just spread the money, and there's no localized agenda that is pushing that financing at a local level. Then the last one was, what are carbon credits? We can take the whole day. But what I can actually say is that Zimbabwe has put up a framework, Zimbabwe framework on carbon credits, which is basically trying to come up with a system. Doctor talked about carbon credits in Gokwe, right? And the local, the foreign investors that were already bringing in money, it's not only in Gokwe. Dr. Ongane will tell you what is happening in Bire. People will talk about what is happening in Chirinda Forest in Chipinge, where local authorities have gone into these deals without the knowledge of the government. So when the government realized that local authorities were coming up with all these deals, they said, no, everything has to be centralized. But the more you centralize things, the more they don't work, right? And what it also does is that even with the devolution component of our constitution, that money might not end up really going to where it matters most, like what Shaliso talked about, to say, if the money that has been collected, it has to go straight to the people who are affected and not ending up Ichingo Perera Kuma salaries. So at the end of the day, you find that the issue of climate justice still remains a component that we need to derive, but it has to be derived from the fact that how do we engage state actors and non-state actors to ensure that there is no exploitation of the weak, and especially women.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I think those were very good responses, and of course I think we still need to also reflect as we finish in terms of the debt versus climate debt. I think these are basically developmental debt, right, that our countries borrow. But I think there are also debates around some colonial debts that we adopted from the previous rulers, and then the countries actually adopted this, and now it has become a huge burden. But now there's also the issue of climate debt that we then that we are all, right? So that we can probably cancel off, do a bit of mathematics, right? And so this is something that we need to probably reflect on. So it would be good to see how this was. We also want to go back to the main thrust of the session. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I don't seem to see any reactions from colleagues virtually or any intervention. So we'd like to move on to the next session. So now we need to discuss issues around the role of women in food security and the El Nino-induced protection risks in a changing climate. So with this, I would like to invite Z to come through and just talk to us from Oxfam, and then we will have maximum 50 minutes. So I have to borrow 10 minutes from you. And then, it's not